Welcome to Tsat. Today I am going to discuss about biofuels. So before getting into the content, we need to know what a biofuel is, and we must be able to differentiate between biofuels and fossil fuels. So in this context, biofuel is a fuel which is being extracted from the contemporary living organisms. Can be from plants or animals or microorganisms. So contemporary means from the existing living beings. Biofuels which are being derived from the existing living beings. We are extracting the fuels from the living beings traditionally and also in terms of modern terms. So how is this process of extraction of fuels, biofuels, different from traditional mode of extraction to modern mode of extraction of biofuels? Traditionally, since age old, we are using firewood as a fuel for different purposes, and we are using cow dung, which is a biofuel derived from the animals. So these are derived from the existing contemporary living beings when relatively compared with fossil fuels. Fossil fuels are fuels which have been produced in the geological past because of geological processes in the Earth's interior in a certain depth in the layer of the soils. So it takes for about certain millions of years for the conversion of fossil fuels from the buried sedimentary rocks from which fossil fuels have been formed by the degradation of living beings which have been buried in the geological past are fossil fuels. Biofuels are contemporary fuels which have been extracted from the existing living beings. That is a fundamental difference between a biofuel and a fossil fuel. In modern terms, biofuels are extracted from the existing contemporary living beings through different processes. So the different processes through which biofuels are being extracted are, for example, fermentation is a process. In the fermentation process, what happens is some carbohydrates, any kind of carbohydrate, might be a simple carbohydrate or a complex carbohydrate. Can be a simple carbohydrate like a glucose or fructose or sucrose can be used to degrade or ferment to generate alcohols, or even a complex carbohydrate like cellulose can also be subjected to fermentation process for the generation of alcohols. So these alcohols can be used as an additive to petrol, so or sometimes can be directly used. Complete alcohol can be directly used instead of petrol. So this is a classic example of biofuel which has been derived from the process of fermentation. The other process in the modern terms which has been used to generate biofuels is trans-esterification. Through the process of trans-esterification of oils, biodiesels are being produced. So through the process of fermentation, alcohols are being produced. Through the process of trans-esterification, biodiesel is being produced. So here in this process, what is happening is whether it is an alcohol or whether it is a biodiesel, is the resultant of photosynthesis. So the oils which are being stored in the plants is the resultant of photosynthesis. The alcohol which is stored, the alcohol which is prepared through the process of fermentation, is the raw material here is a carbohydrate. Carbohydrates are also being generated because of photosynthesis. So whether it is an alcohol or a biodiesel is the resultant of photosynthesis, that we need to keep in mind. So in this process, we need to understand, after understanding what biofuel is, let us discuss what biofuel is. So biofuel is a fuel that is produced through contemporary biological processes such as agriculture and anaerobic digestion. So anaerobic digestion, for example, fermentation is a classic example of anaerobic digestion. In the process of fermentation, the carbohydrates are converted into alcohols by releasing carbon dioxide with the help of certain bacteria and yeast. So biofuel is a fuel which has been generated from the contemporary living organisms, which is not produced from the geological processes in the past. So biofuels can be derived directly from plants or indirectly from agricultural, commercial, domestic and or industrial waste. Renewable biofuels generally involve contemporary carbon fixation such as those that occur in plant or microalgae through the process of photosynthesis. So, these are the products produced through the process. The basic fundamental process is photosynthesis. For example, industrial waste, for example, molasses is an industrial waste. A byproduct of sugarcane industry which can be used to generate alcohol, or bagasse is an industrial waste, a pulp left over after the extraction of juice from the sugarcane is bagasse. So, the bagasse can be directly used as a source to burn and generate power. So, here in this case, but in the case of sugar industries will have a captive power plants, means they have their own power generation units by burning bagasse, which is a pulp left over from the sugarcane after extracting juice for manufacturing sugar. This pulp is being burned directly to generate power, is a waste product of or a byproduct of industrial waste, is a classic example. Other renewable biofuels are made through the use of conversion of biomass. So, you are converting here the biomass referring to recently living organisms, most often referred to plants or plant derived materials. So, you are converting biomass. So, what do you mean by biomass? Biomass is the material with which the living organisms are made up of, the mass with which the plant material with which a plant is made up of, or an animal with which a certain material with which an animal is made up of is known as biomass. So, bio means life, mass. So, the living beings with which they are made up of is biomass. So, with this biomass fuels are being made. So, the biomass can be converted to convenient energy containing substances in 3 different ways. So, through certain processes like thermal conversion, chemical conversion and biochemical conversion. So, here in the case of thermal conversion, when you are applying heat, when you are able to convert a substance into fuel is known as thermal conversion. For example, in transesterification, oils which are being extracted from the plants are being subjected to high heat and pressure. In this process, oils in general have high viscosity and high flash point. So, when the viscosity of the oil and the flash point is being decreased, oils can be used as fuels. Flash point is the temperature at which a fuel catches fire. So, a good fuel is one which catches fire at low temperature. So, what we are doing is, for these conditions, to remove the viscosity and to decrease the flash point, we subject the oils to transesterification process, that is to high temperature and pressure conditions, so that the oils convert into biodiesels, which can be used as a diesel additive, is an example of thermal conversion. For example, in the case of biochemical conversion, for example, biochemical conversion means there are certain biological processes or microorganisms involved in the manufacturing of a fuel, is known as biochemical conversion. The classic example is fermentation. The fermentation process requires microorganisms like yeast and bacteria converts carbohydrates to alcohol. Alcohol is a fuel which can be used in petrol additive. So, recently, why this is in use? Because it is being made mandatory that the petrol which we are using is an ethanol additive. 10% of the petrol being used is mixed with alcohol, a variant of alcohol known as ethanol. So, based upon the kind of raw material which you are using to produce alcohol, any kind of carbohydrate can be used, like a simple carbohydrate like glucose or fructose or sucrose or starch or cellulose. The cellulose is the most complex carbohydrate and the glucose is the most simplest carbohydrate. So, any type of carbohydrate can be used here. So, in this process, this biomass conversion can result in fuels like solids, liquids, or gas formation. For example, firewood is a solid biofuel, alcohol is a liquid biofuel, biodiesel is a liquid biofuel, gobar gas is an example of a biofuel which is in a gaseous state, and the gas which is extracted from the degrading organic matter collected from the domestic waste or vegetable markets, the garbage bin collected can be used to generate a natural gas. No, biogas rather than natural gas is fossil fuel. Biogas is degraded through the process of the contemporary organic matter. Both in the case of natural gas, which is a fossil fuel, and a biogas, which is a biofuel, the composition is the same, dominated by methane. So these are the different variant types of biofuels in terms of alcohols being produced through the process of fermentation. So bioethanol is an alcohol. So depending upon the kind of raw material being used, for example, you can use the waste from the vegetable market. You can use a waste in the agricultural fields like hay or dry grass, which is these days being considered as a waste after being harvesting. Any dry leaves after harvesting from the jowar or sugarcane or rice or wheat, the waste material is cellulose, the most complex carbohydrate, can be fermented to generate alcohols. Waste wood, the shed leaves of the trees in the forest or in the shrubs can also be used as a raw material to generate alcohol in the process of their degradation. Even though these alcohols are poisonous, for example, methyl alcohol, otherwise also known as wood alcohol, even though it is considered poisonous for consumption, even such kind of raw materials can be used to produce alcohols because they are not used for consumption. They are being used for the purpose of fuel in automobiles. So even such grade of raw material can be used for fuels. So that is the other advantage with biofuels. So when the different variant types of raw materials are varying, the family of alcohols being produced like ethanol, propanol, butanol, these are different variant kinds of alcohols being produced, which can be used as fuels, which are being produced depending upon the kind of raw materials which we are using. So what are these different kinds of raw materials? With the change in the technology and technological evolution, there are different kinds of raw materials being used. So in the first stage biofuels, because of the low technology and low innovation, we have only technology where food grade carbohydrates are being used in the production of alcohols. But in a country like India, using food grade material to generate alcohol cannot be accepted because there is huge demand for food because of the exploding population, where you need to feed more than 1.4 billion population. So in this context, the first generation biofuels have been criticized because the raw material is a food grade raw material. So mostly from carbohydrates production such as sugar or starch, crops such as corn, sugarcane or sweet sorghum are the first generation raw materials which are not accepted to a country like India. The second generation biofuels are lignocellulosic biomass. So here in this case of this lignocellulosic biomass, as I have mentioned, lignin and cellulose are the components which are present in wood and shed leaves, which are considered to be waste. So, but it is containing a complex carbohydrate which can be fermented to generate methyl alcohols, which can be used as fuels even though it is poisonous for consumption. So such as trees and grass is also being deposited as a feedstock for ethanol production. So which is used as a gasoline additive. The countries which are using this as a gasoline additive are United States and Brazil. They have gone to the extent of mixing these biofuels to the extent of 50%. We are right now we are at 10%. Our plan by 2024-25 is to get our plan is to add 20% of biofuels into these fossil fuels. So that what the advantage with this is, biofuels act as import substitution. Import substitution means we are dependent upon imported petroleum for about 80% of the petroleum essential in our economy is being imported. So, when you are substituting biofuels, the advantage you have got is you can save the foreign exchange reserves, you are becoming self-reliant, because of which your economy becomes stable. So, the dependency on other countries decreases. So, when you are adding 20% means 20% of the fossil fuel which is being imported can be reduced. So, you are generating fuels indigenously, and the pollutants being released by these biofuels relatively compared with fossil fuels is less, low carbon footprint, self-reliance, and you will be able to save more foreign exchange reserves, so that your economy will be stable, and it creates employment to people who are not skilled, because you can cultivate certain plants which generate oils like jethropa or castor oil, which doesn't require any kind of technical skill set. So, it is creating a kind of employment to people who are not skilled. That is the other advantage with these kind of biofuels. So, biofuels can be used as fuels for vehicles in its pure form. So, it is used as a diesel additive to reduce the level of particulate and carbon monoxide and hydrocarbons. So, what is happening is, as I have already mentioned, that the amount of pollutants being released from the biofuels relatively compared with fossil fuels is less. And this is another process apart from fermentation, the trans-esterification process, which I have mentioned in terms of producing biodiesel. So, in this production, there are certain issues involved. So, there are certain advantages, as I have mentioned, there are certain disadvantages. So, the other an advantageous factor, for example, when there is an import substitution, when there is indigenous production of a fuel, what happens is, even though there are fluctuations of prices in the international market, it doesn't impact your economy, because the reason behind it is, this fuel is being indigenously be generated in your domestic economy. So, the fluctuations happening in the international market for the crude oil will not impact you when you are self-reliant and when a source is being produced indigenous. So, your economy will not be impacted by the increasing in the price of crude oil, petroleum in the international market. The other disadvantage is food versus fuel problem. So, when you are using a food grade material for fuel generation is a criticism in a country like India. Other advantage is poverty reduction potential, because it can give employment to unskilled labor. It is an advantageous factor, and carbon emission levels are less. It is an advantageous factor. Sustainable biofuel production, because this is sustainable, because as in the case of fossil fuels, they are not sustainable. They cannot be reproduced again. But in the case of biofuels, you can cultivate crops and you can generate again. And they are sustainable not only because there is consistency in terms of supply, because you can cultivate. They are sustainable because even the level of pollution is less. The other criticism is, there is possibility of deforestation for the cultivation of certain few crops for biofuels, may lead to soil erosion and some environmental impact, like reduction in biodiversity, because you are cultivating only few species of crops. So, impact on water resources. So, if you are cultivating few species, the rate of percolation decreases. The more the vegetation in a catchment region, more is the rate of percolation of water, increasing the groundwater level. So, the water resources might be impacted because the biodiversity in terms of vegetation might be cleared to cultivate these crops. Next is rural social exclusion and injustice. The fear is because of some loopholes existing in the land legislation. Because majority of the land in the name of benamis is in the hands of landlords, how far these fruits can reach or percolate to the lower sections is a question, is a criticism. So, in this process, in the case of first generation biofuels, because of low technology, food grade biofuels like sugar, starch and vegetable oils are being used in the case of first generation biofuel technology. In the case of second generation biofuel technology, with the change in time, with the innovation of technology, we are able to adopt, innovate a kind of technology where we are using waste material as a raw material to generate biofuels. That happened in the second stage. The raw materials are lignocellulosic biomass or wood, which is a waste wood, or shed leaves in the autumn, etc. When the leaves are being shed, or the agricultural waste, the hay which is left over after the cultivation of paddy or rice can also be used as raw material to generate alcohols like methyl alcohols and ethyl alcohols, propanols, etc. In the case of third generation biofuels, we are using algae which contain 50% of oil to generate biodiesel. This algae can be cultivated with the sewage water after treatment. So, it is not consuming water which is essential for irrigation or drinking purpose. It is consuming wastewater. This is third generation biofuels, and the waste of after extracting oil, this algae can also be used for burning and generating energy. So, this is third generation biofuels, a variant of algae which has got certain oil, 50% of oil which can be used to generate biodiesel through the process of esterification. So, in this case of alcohol manufacturing, this is how the fermentation process happens. The corn or any kind of, this is the example being given here is corn. Any kind of starch, rice, wheat or hay or lignocellulosic biomass or wood, it consists of carbohydrate. These are, when they are being subjected to fungus like yeast or any kind of bacteria, degrades leading to fermentation. Fermentation process releases carbon dioxide, which is an anaerobic process, water and ethanol, a class of alcohol. So, depending upon the raw material which we use, the type of alcohol forms varies. So, ethyl alcohol, methyl alcohol or propanol or butanol, whatever it is, varies depending upon the raw materials being used. These I have mentioned the different kinds of raw materials like even the hay, the lignocellulosic biomass or the industrial byproduct like molasses or bagasse or corn or sorghum or starch or any complex carbohydrate can be used. So, these are the examples of species of plants which can be cultivated even in a semi-arid region, which does not require any kind of special skill sets, which yields oils, and these oils are not consumable, not at the grade of consumption. These are these can be used as biofuels. So, we have identified these crops in our region which can be cultivated in semi-arid and arid regions with the proper agricultural plan. Oils can be extracted. So, jatropha is one of such plant where from the seeds of this jatropha, which is prevalent in our plateau region and surrounding regions of rural Telangana and many parts of India, where these seeds contain oil, and even castrol, most of the regions where it is suffering with drought can be used to cultivate castrol. The oil which is not edible but can be used to generate biodiesel. The third species is Pongamia pinnata. This Pongamia pinnata oil is also not oil which is not consumable. Locally we call it as kanuga, and the oil is being subjected to transesterification to generate biodiesels. So, unlike crop based biofuels does not entitle a decrease in food production, since it requires neither farmland nor fresh water. So, what is happening in the case of these algae, it is not consuming any land nor it is consuming fresh water. So, it is the sewage treated water is being supplied for the cultivation. In the case of fourth generation biofuels, which are consuming non-arable land, through the process of transesterification, which I have shown you, in the case of jatropha or castrol or Pongamia pinnata, or the fourth generation biofuels, the biodiesel can be produced through transesterification process. So, the different class of ethanols produced in this process of fermentation by using different variant types of raw materials like alcohols like ethanol, propanol, butanol. These are a class of alcohols depending upon the type of raw material being used. Biobutanol is also known as biobutanol because of the process of fermentation, because living organisms like microorganisms like bacteria and yeast are being used in the process of fermentation process. These are the different variant types of biofuels, and the advantage with biofuels is you become self-reliant, low pollution emission, and they help in import substitution so that your foreign exchange reserves can be saved. Those are the main advantages with biofuels. So friends, in the next session we will be discussing some other topic in science and technology. Thank you.